Are we still waiting for anybody?
Is Steve joining us?
I'll go double check.
Okay, thanks, Jill.
He's just trying to log on.
Okay, we'll wait a minute. Okay, I think we're all here now. It is 5:32 p.m. Mr. Verlingo, can you call the roll, please?
Okay, Mr. Campbell,
Here.
Ms. Chrysler,
Here.
Mr. Hairston,
Here.
Ms. Mooring,
Here.
Ms. Piccolantonio.
Here. Thank you. So there's only one item that's on the agenda tonight, and it is a discussion about creating a COVID-19 community task force, basically a new, not a standing board committee, but kind of a temporary board committee, hopefully as temporary as possible. So I guess I'm just going to talk about why this meeting got called, what conversations kind of prompted it, and then we can go from there. So I think, I don't know, probably all the way back when we knew that there was going to be a global pandemic, some of us had some conversations about possibly creating a task force that would include some medical experts in the community, I spent a lot of time looking at different school districts. I know a lot of us have done a lot of the same. And it seems like everybody kind of has their own way of handling the pandemic this year. Some school districts that I've seen have created task forces, kind of like what I'm thinking about. Some have not. Some have had a lot of the decisions being made at a board level. Some have done it at an administrative level. I think there's been all kinds of variability. But as the summer went on and as the school year started, and as the amount of communication that I know that I have gotten has continued to just increase. And I know I'm not the only one of us who has had an incredible amount of communication from parents, from other community members. I started to think a little bit more about why we ever created the board committees that we have. So the standing board committees that we have, finance and facilities, student learning and achievement, and policy and governance, those were all created by this board. And they were created because I think all of us feel really strongly that we want to be transparent and that we want to engage with our community. And I guess as I thought about how much communication there has been over this summer, as I've kind of thought about how things have continued to unfold, and how the pandemic became something that was not just, this temporary month-long situation, but really a longer, but still temporary situation. I had some conversations with Mrs. Chrysler over the past couple of weeks. I think she's having some of the same kind of thoughts that I've had. I just think that it makes sense that we would create a committee for the very same reasons that we created, like I said, the other board committees. And I looked at our bylaws. The president has the authority to create a committee at any time, but I thought that it made more sense for us to at least have a conversation about it, so that everybody had the opportunity to kind of weigh in on what they thought that committee should look like. If anybody has any thoughts about the committee, I'm going to turn it over first, I think, to Mrs. Chrysler, because I have had some direct conversations with her, and I know she's got some thoughts in her mind too about maybe how we can balance it, because I know you all meaning Steve and Jill and Mike, you all have a lot on your plates. And I know that the committee work takes up a lot of time. I think it's valuable time, but I think Mrs. Chrysler maybe has some ideas about how we can try to balance it, so that knowing that this is just a temporary committee, maybe it can balance out with some of the other work that we do. So I'm going to turn it over first to Mrs. Chrysler.
Yeah, thank you. And I thought that was a really good introduction. I mean, I think in some of the conversations that we've had over the last couple of weeks, and just some of the thoughts that I've been having, even just as we continue now to get increased information, I think that there is a need for us to kind of formalize this in some sort of way. I do want to just take a step back though and make sure that I'm paying the appropriate respect to the work that has been done by the district at all levels, through the pandemic. And I think that this wasn't something that I really thought of until recently, because we knew internally, as both a board through updates or just, conversations with you, Mr. Barrett and Mrs. Elliott individually, the work that you were doing. We know the relationship that you have with the city. We know the relationship that you have with Chief Spence. We know the relationship that you've had with Franklin County Health and how they've been such an amazing guide and how you've been taking their guidance. We know you've been talking to pediatricians and mental health professionals, especially our own talented staff. And so we know that the decisions that we've made throughout the pandemic haven't been made in a vacuum. It's not just, two people sitting in a room and deciding when we're going to go back to school and not go back to school, or what the safety protocols are going to be. And so, but I think that if anything, over the last couple of weeks, part of what has come to light for me and just has been a conviction for me is that it's that outward communication and that outward public engagement of the process, and sometimes the process that's happening internally, that I think helps people to understand the whys. And I think the board did a really good job in August or September, crafting a letter that went out to the community to describe all of the things that were going into the decision-making process with respect to how we were going to return to school. And we tried to outline it, facilities, contract negotiations, all of the things that legalities, liability, all of the things that we put into that letter. But that right there, I maybe should have been a red flag that those were the kinds of conversations that we needed to be having on a more ongoing and public way, to be able to communicate with people what was going on and the experts that we were consulting with. So that's why I thought that this was a good idea to pick this up. And now with coming inside for winter, and obviously the things that are happening around the nation and locally, having not that we're not doing that work currently, but then making it a little bit more of an outward effort, I think would be beneficial. I did have the suggestion, and there's certainly no pride in ownership of this, but Student Learning and Achievement Committee has been struggling in the pandemic because, first we shut down, a certain portion of the school buildings. We're learning in a different way. And so some of the things that we typically get updates on, they don't seem relevant right now in the current situation that we have. And so one of the thoughts that I had is that maybe we take the Student Learning and Achievement Committee and we actually turn that into the temporary COVID committee. And so I would offer and if anybody else wants to, I certainly don't need to, but it doesn't put anything more on my plate to chair that committee. And then we can expand it by, inviting other people to come and be a part of it on a regular basis. But it wouldn't result in more work necessarily for the board. Although we may want to pick up the frequency of those meetings just because of the current pandemic and situation. And it doesn't mean also that we couldn't talk about curriculum topics at that meeting, because some of those things may be relevant to, mental health, and COVID and how we're learning in COVID. So they seem to dovetail nicely together. And so that was the thought I had with respect to potential organization. And again, I am definitely not looking for more to do in my life. So if anybody else has any different opinions, I am certainly not, there's no pride in authorship here in these ideas. So those were just some of my general thoughts. I guess maybe one last thing just to throw out there and then open it up for conversation. My thought is that it first starts out as I know other places, Dublin, New Albany, there's varying ways that this has been done. And sometimes it's a community-wide task force, and sometimes there's school district only or city only task force. I mean, I think that right now we need to bite off what we can chew. And so I think my idea or suggestion would be that this starts out as a district committee. If at some point, we obviously need to talk about what that makeup is and make sure that we're including representation from anybody that wants to participate, that's an entity that kind of has a role to play in these discussions. Certainly, medical professionals, health department, Chief Spence, the fire department, or there are people like that want to be a part of it. I don't think that precludes us from turning this into a community committee at some point in the future. But I think that those conversations haven't even taken place with our community partners. And I think that we could definitely be open to those conversations, in my opinion, if the rest of the board feels the same way. But for right now, it just seemed like this was enough to bite off, to just kind of have a group that was, at least starts out, focused on the district and decisions that the district needs to make throughout the rest of the pandemic. So I just offer that again also for discussion. I'm going to mute now.
Okay, thanks. It's so awkward to have like an actual discussion in a virtual environment. I'm not going to call on you guys because I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if any of my board colleagues have any thoughts, if Mr. Barrett or Mrs. Elliott have any thoughts, I guess unmute. Just try not to talk over each other.
I just want to say that, I agree with Jennifer wholeheartedly. I just want to make sure that it is actually apparent as to what our goals and our roles are with this pandemic and stuff, because I don't want to appear to the community that we're providing something or giving some kind of false guidance or anything of that nature to the community. So, and I don't want their expectations to be more than what we can actually accomplish. So, I mean, I think that, on the onset, I think it is important that we actually understand and let the community know that these are our goals and this is what our role is in this during this pandemic time. But I do agree that as far as with Jennifer about the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, I think that that's a good, starting point because it is very relative as to what we're trying to do as far as with our teachers and everything else in our students. So, I support that.
I think Brian's right. I think the idea of having that committee meeting on the normal evenings we would have SLA is a good idea because scheduling is always difficult. I think that's also an appropriate use of time and effort. And Brian's right about, make sure we are extremely explicit about the boundaries and about the purpose and the decision-making or influence ability of this committee. I think it's something that needs to be well-defined, but I think it is something in a step in the right direction. I think the community wants to see that kind of discussion and the transparency for something that is, it really matters these days. But yeah, the definition is very important.
I guess that's where I was listening to kind of derive what the purpose or the function of the committee would be. And so I heard, I think in Jennifer's comments, that a communication tool is kind of one of the things that entered her mind. But what, I mean, if people have ideas, I'm just kind of lost as to what the purpose, what the defined purpose and wanted goals of the committee are.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the communication for me was maybe twofold. One, just the opportunity to have a public dialogue on a regular basis about where the district is, where the administration is and the board is relative to decisions that we're making, or what's going into those decisions, or information that we're receiving relative to the pandemic. So I think that was part of the communication aspect for me. Whether we have somebody who's a communications expert, I would recommend we even have Hinda a part of that committee to see if there's anything that we need to communicate out of the committee. But I guess I just brainstorming in my mind, I sort of thought that it was an opportunity to not necessarily make recommendations or decisions, because that's not what we do in any of our committees necessarily, but an opportunity to hear from a variety of different people. Almost like I equate it to a presentation on the pilot program for foundations, right? Where it starts out as a presentation with a small group of people who are part of a pilot program, and this is what this is, and these are the next steps. And we ask questions, we get information. I still think it's up to, obviously, Steve and Jill as to the ultimate decisions that are made with respect to, and I'll just use an example, whether we stay in hybrid or go full time, or whether we stay in hybrid and go back to distance, like those transitions. That's the one example I can think of automatically, like how we make those transitions and when we make them. Graduation probably would have been another one where, to have feedback or to, have that topic discussed, and then hear from somebody from public health and hear from somebody who might be a pediatrician or a medical professional that lives within the community, not necessarily to make a recommendation, but to have an opportunity to have that discussion and get that input in a broader context.
Yeah, and I think I would again go back to the reason that we created the standing committees that we have. One of those reasons, one of the primary reasons that we created those standing committees, was to have a vehicle for the board to have those public conversations in dialogue with the community. I guess from my perspective, this is a similar scenario where a lot of, obviously, or maybe not obviously to the community, but a lot of that dialogue has been happening internally. Dialogue with Franklin County Public Health every day. Dialogue with medical professionals and mental health professionals. That is something that is ongoing and that happens in the district all the time. But to have a vehicle for the board to be a part of that dialogue, but also, and I think primarily for the community to be able to hear that dialogue and to hear those recommendations and to hear from experts who are looking specifically at our school district and looking at the data, and just, I guess I keep saying the same thing, but to have that dialogue a little bit more transparently. Again, the volume of communication that I have had beginning at the beginning of March, and I guess I'll take out the period from the last few weeks because I know that that was different. But up until that point, I mean, it was a very high volume of communication, and I enjoy that. I mean, I enjoy having that communication. What I worried about, though, is that I'm only hearing from the people who know to reach out to me, and Jennifer is only hearing from the people who know to reach out to her, and Daphne only from the people who know to reach out to her, and Matt and Brian the same. If that number of people is reaching out to all of us, then that just means there are that many more people in our community who are interested in hearing that thought process, hearing that dialogue, having a better understanding of what the data is and what's being looked at and what's being considered and why decisions are being made. So I guess from my perspective, to turn that in, not to turn it, but to provide a vehicle for public dialogue on those topics and with those experts, I think would be a good, helpful thing for our community.
I think this is a very good idea. And I think for the time being, replacing student learning and achievement with this committee, with all the things that are pressing with the virus and all the new data that comes out almost daily. I think it's really important that involving the public in the way we've done with policy and finance and student learning, some really good outcomes have come from that work. And I remember when we instituted the 3 committees in 2016, it was exactly as you described it, Verl. It was a vehicle to do the work we needed to do in a public way so that we could get input and be transparent. And I think this is, a real opportunity to learn from what our parents and our community members are feeling and thinking and hearing. But I also think there's experts in our community that could give us guidance that, we've, talked with parents who are epidemiologists, who are, pediatricians, who are people who work in, business and, what they're doing with the virus. And so, people who are in employment law, all kinds of different aspects. And I think part of what happens is we learn from those folks, but it isn't learning that's public, and therefore it's not as valuable to the whole community as it could be, because we're having these singular conversations and they're not more broad. And I think that, there's all kinds of research coming out about, kids in school and whether or not it can take place as the virus continues to grow. And I think having discussions about that, I can tell you today was one of the best days we've had. Well, let me just say I've had in a long time. We went to 5 elementaries and we saw kids there, and everybody was wearing their masks. There was social distancing. There was, dots for kids to stand on as they were ready to go to the restroom. There was one directional arrows. There were lots of adjustments being made. And, there was cathartic tears by teachers when they saw kids get off the bus and come into the building. And I think it's important to, figure out how do we sustain that and stay safe. And I can tell you today felt very, very safe and very deliberate and very well organized. But as we know, the virus is growing. There was another 2,500 cases today. And so how do we maintain that and learn to keep both teachers and staff and kids safe and still give kids what they desperately need? They were so joyous today to be in school. And I know another group is going to come in tomorrow. And it was so moving to see that excitement from both teachers and principals and students. So I think anytime we can have deliberative dialogue and be transparent and learn, you think of the student learning and achievement, and the student who did the presentation on ASL and did the survey, and we thought, oh, we were going to hire half a teacher to teach ASL as another foreign language, and now we have 2 full-time teachers. And that was germinated from a committee meeting with one student with an idea, and she's already graduated, but many students are benefiting. So I think this is a great idea. It's all of you work so hard as board members, and I think replacing it with, I think we can all agree that student learning achievement is probably our favorite meeting. Sorry, Matt and Daphne. Finance and policy are are good, but student learning achievement is really about the work we do, and having COVID-19 meeting replace it for the time being, I think is a wise idea. So I think it's worth pursuing.
And that sort of triggered an idea, what you just said, Mr. Barrett, of kind of a potential topic. So when we were doing all the work with the HVAC systems and the building to get the buildings ready, what buildings were ready, what aren't, why aren't they ready? I think we were able to kind of summarize it in a paragraph in our board letter to the community, but it would have been great to have somebody whether it's Scott Lofton or whether it's even an expert in the community who walks the buildings with Scott and kind of goes over his list and says, hey, I'm look at our master facilities committee. So maybe it's a person from there that talks about, we've got, that talks about what the challenges are to our specific buildings, what makes us different from Columbus Academy or Dublin or Upper Arlington, because I think that's something that people need to know, right? That's questions that we've asked personally, but it's it'd be nice to just get an update in that type of meeting environment where we say, okay, we're going to talk about where our facilities are today, what we need to do to accommodate, 2 days back in, and this is the maximum number of students in these buildings, and this is why, and this is the outcome of, this is what we need to invest in order to get back to school 2 days a week. This is what we need to invest in to get back to school 5 days a week. This is those types of that type of information, I think would be great information to share in a committee so that we can ask questions, but also the community can hear and potentially ask questions as well.
I think that's very good. Those ideas are very good. I think even I was just so moved by what I saw today and all the work that principals and support staff, custodians put into, being ready for today at the middle school. At the elementary school and high school, middle school will start Monday. But I think field trips, bringing all of you in to see how thoughtful and deliberate people have been. If you're interested in going, it's pretty impressive, the organization that took place. And we got to witness a mass break today, and we got to witness lunch and kids walking to lunch. And so it's different. School is different right now, and the adjustments everybody has made to prepare are pretty amazing.
So unless anyone has any other comments to make, questions to ask. Okay, what I'm going to do, I guess, is just, we don't have to take a vote on this. I think I'm just going to say that we are going to temporarily suspend Student Learning and Achievement Committee and create a temporary committee, which is a COVID-19 community task force, or whatever we want to call it. Since Mrs. Chrysler is the chair of Student Learning and Achievement Committee, she will be the chair of this new temporary committee. I am the second board member who's on Student Learning and Achievement Committee, so I'll go with her to this temporary COVID committee. obviously, all other board members are welcome at any other time. What I'm going to do, just like we do with all of our other committees, is leave it to the chairperson to work out. I think we're probably going to be meeting more often, right? At least for now, than Student Learning and Achievement Committee. But I'm going to leave it to the chairperson to figure out with district administration the timing of those meetings, maybe come up for the first meeting with a proposed topic schedule like we do with Student Learning and Achievement Committee. And then we can go from there as far as depending on the topic, what other individuals we want to invite to be at particular committee meetings, depending on the topics. I know, I mean, maybe this makes people uncomfortable, but I think it's one of those where we're going to have to go and kind of feel our way through, where we know what topics are important. And then from those topics, we'll know what community members or community partners we need to reach out to include in those meetings. Unless somebody has an objection to doing it that way, I mean, that's most similar to how we handle our other committees, if that makes sense.
I would maybe only add, though, that I think as a standing member, and they've made this clear that that's something they want to participate in. I mean, I think it's always going to be good to have somebody from Franklin County Health there.
Right.
We've asked for, they've made it very public that they are encouraging communities and districts, school districts, to set this up, set this type of structure up so that they have a vehicle as well, that they can share information. And so I think that would be something. And then I also think that, well, there's three things I want to say. That was the first one. The second one is, I do think it's very important that we can reach out to, or if somebody's listening tonight, that they are a member of the community who's in the medical profession, because we know we have certainly the public health component of it, but also we want to make sure that we're also getting the medical side of it, because there is a difference, I think, in the perspective and opinions, and we want to make sure that we're hearing all of those perspectives and opinions. And so that might be a standing member type of appointment as well. And then the third thing is, I would agree with Burl. I think, with the exception of the last several weeks, the volume of calls and texts and emails that have come to me with COVID specific related questions has been probably cumulatively more than I have received in my entire tenure of the board up to this point. And so I would encourage everyone to look through their emails, texts, and kind of the phone calls that you've had, and topics of interest from people. I think that's maybe the first place to start, is in trying to find agenda items and topics for meetings, because I think we have an idea maybe in our own about what people want to hear about. But I do think that we should go back to that evidence and see what were the things that people were really asking about and what were they concerned with. And that may evolve as the pandemic evolves this winter as well.
That makes sense. I know the liaison person from Franklin County Public Health is Jenny McAdams. I think she's the person who's coordinating all of these all of the committee work where Franklin County Public Health is involved with the school districts. So I mean, I think that makes sense to have them as somebody from Franklin County Public Health as a standing committee member on the committee.
I have a question. Is there a way that we can actually be, as far as community or experts in the field, be a little more proactive, to the point to where, even surveying, what's your skill set, or what do you have to bring, what do you have to offer, whether you're a doctor, mental health professional, or whatever. Because now, if we have subject matter that we're going to discuss, I didn't want to get in a position to where we got to find someone possibly from the community that is an expert in this area, aside from public health and things of that nature. Is there any way that we just have like a sign up and just some, because I think that the community would actually be willing, since they've already been reaching out and telling us about their expertise and things of that nature, to actually gather that information and have that as like a resource guide for us, to whereas if we're having to make a decision on the spot, we have go-to people that have actually given us interest or told us they were interested in participating if needed. So.
We can work on that, Brian.
Okay. Anything else from anyone else? I think what we should all do is watch for, I think Mrs. Chrysler and I can work with Mrs. Elliott and Mr. Barrett to come up with, like I said, a proposed schedule and topic list, and then everybody else can kind of watch for that and participate in as much or as little as you would enjoy participating in. Anything else from anyone else? Okay, that was maybe the quickest board meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Mrs. Chrysler, is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Campbell, any discussion? Okay, Mr. Verlingo, can you call the roll, please?
Pickle Antonio,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Ms. Chrysler,
Yes.
Mr. Hairston,
Yes.
Ms. Mooring.
Yes.
I think it's 6:06 and we are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.